Sanctuary cities have been in the headlines in recent weeks. President Trump says his administration will hold back federal funds from cities that have policies in place that direct local law enforcement to avoid asking about immigration status if it's not directly related to a case, and not cooperate with some requests from immigration officials, like holding people in jail until ICE officials pick them up. Now, this week's Line Opinion panelists are ready to share their thoughts on sanctuary cities in New Mexico. I'm joined at the table by Tom Garrity from the Garrity Group PR. Daniel Foley is here. He's a former New Mexico House Minority Whip. Antoinette Cedillo-Lopez is here. She's Executive Director of Enlace Comunitario. And our friend Julianne Grimm is down from Santa Fe. She's the editor of the Santa Fe Reporter. Now, Antoinette, does the designation actually, just a fundamental basic question. To this point, does this designation actually protect immigrants at this point? Is it working in your view?
Well, what's interesting about it is really declining to do the federal government's work.
Okay.
And the threat in his orders and in his statements is just a hollow threat. You'll remember the Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. And while most of it was upheld, there was a really key provision that wasn't upheld, and it took away money from states that refused to opt in. And the courts struck that down.
I see.
There's a Prince case in which a sheriff didn't want to do background checks for guns, and he sued. And the Prince case said that there is no obligation of the county government, the city government, or the state government to do the work of the federal government. So that it's a really hollow threat.
Interesting.
And I think it does make a difference because it makes communities feel safe with state and local services, and that's better for health.
And Tom, that's part of the goal of the folks getting after the ordinance. We'll talk to Julianne about this in a second, but just kind of tweaking the wording a little bit. But it seemed like safety and security was mainly the thrust here, so people would feel safe. Is that a reasonable expectation to have for your citizens? It seems pretty okay for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great talking point. It's very reasonable, and of course, this whole issue is just stemming from the campaign, and campaign promises of a candidate that he's bringing through fruition. But it's nothing new that has been happening. As far as what we are seeing new is the scale and the timing, and I think that's what's throwing a lot of people off. Because it really, as Antoinette alluded to, what we're looking at is how a state and local government interacts with the federal government, and how much they assist the feds, in this case ICE, or how much they decide not to assist. So it's but the talking point is just that, it's a talking point, and I think both sides have used it to their advantage when it suits their arguments.
That's a good point there. Exactly, Julianne. What was interesting following the trials and tribulations of this moving along is the wordplay, the tweaking of the wordplay, particularly the removal of that word sanctuary. Talk about that.
So what's happening now is there are proposals, there's some dueling proposals before the Santa Fe City Council where different lawmakers are looking at affirming the 1999 policy of the city, which does contain the word sanctuary. And so you've now got two proposals where they're affirming that policy without using that word. And
is that possible?
Yes, because it's just a word. It's semantics.
It's a big word, though. I mean, it's the word.
It's similar to the way that ICE doesn't want you to use the word raid. They're using the word surge right now. So really, it's a different way of addressing the same concept. And I think that if the word sanctuary is making people feel squeamish, you're seeing people who are advocating for immigrant rights in our community say, hey, it's not the word. We don't care about the word either. It's okay with us if you remove that. But what's notable about these policies is not the little argument about that word. It's that there are direct actions that are described in this proposed resolution that would strengthen the policy. For example, the city would affirmatively say they're not going to use the E-Verify program when they hire people. I think that it just goes beyond kind of creating a culture in the government and the provision of services where you're not only not cooperating with ICE, but you're also protecting people and making them feel like they have a right to be there.
Interesting point there. Daniel, going back to that word sanctuary, is it somewhat of a victory for Mr. Trump having that word removed? I mean, if it causes that much consternation, is he actually sort of winning the battle in Santa Fe in an odd way?
I don't think he. I don't think it is, and I don't think that he's just. Again, I don't know the guy. I don't think he's a moral victory kind of guy. I think he's an all or nothing kind of guy. He's either going to win the war. He doesn't care about winning battles and doing things. He's going to win it all. I think he'll come back out and say, I don't care if you take the word sanctuary out or not. Here's the things you're doing. That's what I'm talking about. And I think he'll lower the boom just as quickly as he would if the word sanctuary.
Interesting point though. But if in fact it turns out that there's no there's sort of a paper tiger result, has he in fact diminished himself in the eyes of sanctuary cities?
So no, because I
win, in
don't think
fact.
there's a paper tiger result here.
Okay.
I mean, I think you're going to see movement. I think that some of the conversations at the table about the Affordable Care Act and things like that are far different than implementing federal law. And when you start taking a proactive stance as a subset government, remember, one of the things that happens when cities and states declare bankruptcy, they ultimately fall at the heels of the federal government. The federal government is backing them. And we have all these interstate commerce clause, we have all these abilities to do things. So at the end of the day, when you start saying, well, we're not going to use E-Verify, we don't care what the law says about immigration, we're not holding them, we're not keeping them, we're not asking questions. I think, it's different when you start saying, look, we want you, Santa Fe Police or Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, we want you to go out and conduct these raids, and you have to go do that. I think there can be some pushback. But when you start saying things like, when we catch somebody, when we detain somebody, and we find out that there's an ICE hold on them, we're not telling you, we're going to let them go. I think the courts are going to take a far different stance than saying whether you can pull money from the road fund for the Affordable Care Act when they talked about it. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be it's going to be a tough battle. But I think it's interesting. People are forgetting this is a mainstay of what he ran for president on. This is not something that came out of the background.
Antoinette, some of the wordplay that Julianne referenced, is it seemed like, well, let me back up. A series of meetings. In this last meeting, it became clear that another side of this needed to be accommodated, and that would be folks who are cognizant and respectful of the rule of law. You hear this come up, the rule of law. Touch on that.
Well, the rule of law includes a constitution. And the president cannot do this by himself.
Okay.
He has to do it with Congress, he has to do it with local leaders, he has to consult. You can't just say this is going to happen and have all of the cities and the counties bow to your will. And I totally disagree with you, and I'm actually surprised because most state rights people are Republicans. This is a matter of states' rights. And the Prince case is very clear that the states and the local governments do not have to comply with the federal government's directives. And that's exactly what this is, it's a directive. And the executive order has absolutely no teeth. It would require legislation to do it, and I think it would be struck down so fast.
That's an interesting thought. Julianne, I'm going to swing back to you real quick. I referenced that previous Wednesday City Council meeting where folks felt like they weren't being heard and folks wanted to come back and hear this other side. And there was an idea, in fact, the headline, Council pushes alternative sanctuary city resolution after immigrant rights group hijacks town hall meeting.
So it's important to note this was not a city council meeting.
Okay.
This was one of the city councilors holding a town hall style meeting to meet with his constituents.
A listening meeting, so to speak.
I think that they were taken aback by the presence of dozens of people who wanted to talk about the immigration issue and the sanctuary city issue. I don't really think it's fair to characterize that as hijacking a meeting. It's everyone had an equal opportunity to be at that meeting. I think one of the things that's happening now is a lot of people who have a strong opinion, who say they want the federal immigration laws enforced, to the right to the T. Those people are saying things on the internet and in forums where they feel they're friendly. They're saying things that they won't say to other human beings in person. And so I think if you feel afraid to say what you want to say in the midst of a person who disagrees with you, maybe that's an indicator about the validity of what you have to say, or how proud of yourself are you for what you have to say.
Right. How are we to read the division in Santa Fe from afar? Has it split something? What are the percentages?
I think that Santa Fe, if this were to go to the voters of Santa Fe, I think you would see overwhelming support for the welcoming policies. I think that, like in every community, there's division. Right. But if you had to do a tally of how many people in our city want the city to cooperate with immigration enforcement and how many people want the city to not cooperate, I think you'll see more people on that other side.
I think it's going to be interesting, too, to see how it plays out. First of all, states' rights, those that are advocates for states' rights don't believe the federal government has zero role. Right. So, and federal immigration is not a states' rights issue. It's a federal issue. I mean, we don't want the states implementing immigration law on a state-by-state basis, and that may be a difference that you and I have. But at the end of the day, I think that the president does have broad authority through all kinds of programs, whether they're money that's being given to police departments, money that's being done through executive action, executive orders, programs that the president has the authority through, like Homeland Security, places like that very easily they can say, here's the rules to get this money out of the program. And I think you're going to see lots of communities. And what's interesting, you're already starting to see it. There's already starting to be some conversations in places like San Francisco where there's a concern now that if this federal money comes, what programs are we going to cut if we don't have that money?
Tom, this is going back to Santa Fe. It's consistent with who they are, meaning it's much like a business, and you want to put out your moral bearing first. This is who we are, because you attract certain type of people that will contribute to that. So is Santa Fe on safe PR grounds here? Do you know what I mean? This is what they are. It's what they do. So,
yeah, I mean, they're true to their brand.
Right.
They're not doing something that is, counter to what people would think. Santa Fe is the city different, and they have, a lot of unique takes on different issues that the rest of the state and parts of America don't necessarily agree with. But I think that they are being true to their brand. Two side stories that I think have developed as a result of this conversation is the resurgence of the sanctuary movement amongst different religious organizations. And so we've seen that really kind of start to surface. So, it'll be interesting to see how that really develops in the midst of potential tax code changes 2 years from now, and how nonprofit organizations are viewed when it comes to political statements. The second is, and this is probably the most surprising to me, this is not obviously the lead story, but it's a day two, and that is the role that Michelle Lujan Grisham, or Congressman Lujan Grisham, is playing amongst all of this. Right. Here she is in the midst of announcing that she's running for governor, but at the same point in time, she's now a player at the national level on behalf of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And so I don't think anybody saw this particularly coming. And now, just as she's getting a voice, she's quickly going to be exiting that stage. And sometimes I wonder if she kind of wishes that she had not really made that announcement quite yet.
That's a good point. Interesting. Well, just a couple of minutes here, Antoinette. We have had ICE in New Mexico, down south. It has happened. Yes. As we're seeing on national television and other communities, it's happening here right now. How afraid should folks be here in New Mexico?
Well, I think we're working with the Supreme Court and trying to get them to make sure that they don't collaborate with ICE in the courthouses because of the difference that makes for witnesses, for victims, and even for perpetrators who would not be willing to go, because it's basically a death sentence to. So it is creating fear in the community. But I think that that is an area where the president does have authority. He has authority over how ICE operates, and we are seeing a difference.
Interesting. Julianne, going to finish with you on the Santa Fe bit. You were kind of covering around the horn here on ICE stuff. I asked the same question I asked of Tom. It's consistent with Santa Fe's image. At the end of it, kind of casting out forward. Any damage to Santa Fe at the end of this discussion, or is Santa Fe stronger?
Well, I think one thing that's also important to note is that, the police department, those officers are commissioned, by the state government. And so they have choice. We had this come up with the decriminalization of marijuana in the city of Santa Fe. And so I think that one issue that's going a little under the radar is how the local police force actually practices this idea. And we had a story in the Santa Fe Reporter this week about 3 times in the last 2 years when the city police will admit that they contacted ICE. And I'm not sure they have great record keeping to tell us with certainty that there weren't many other times when they contacted ICE. Sure. But in one instance, there was a man who was just at Zozobra. He was just there. He wasn't arrested at Zozobra for picking a fight or carrying drugs or doing anything untoward. He was just there. He was spotted by a city police officer who knew that he had been previously deported. And that officer contacted ICE and sought a warrant, and that we believe was followed through with. Right. The other thing that I think is worrisome, to your point about how people should be worried, is that ICE, like many federal agencies, does not feel obligated to speak to the local press. So, we put the inquiries in, we have to put in a Freedom of Information Act written request to get information. So we don't know how many people ICE comes after in our community. If they are going to hold a roadblock like we've heard has happened happened in Austin, Texas. I'm not sure that we're really going to be able to get straight answers out of ICE as local journalists about what's happening in our town.
That's a very good point.
And I think it's
go ahead.
important to remember that nobody has an obligation to collaborate with them or to help them do their work. Nobody has that obligation.
It's an important point. We'll continue to follow this one for sure.